Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished guests and participants of the conference, welcome to the first plenary session. I am Irma Riyani, will facilitate these sessions. I am very delighted to facilitate these sessions as we have here today a very well-known and prominent expert in Islamic and Women Studies, Professor Amina Wadud, Ph.D. Welcome, Professor, to this conference. Thank you for joining with us. Prof. Amina Wadud is currently stay in Yogyakarta, affiliated to Sunan Kalijaga State Islamic University and Gajah Mada University. I hope you enjoy your stay in Indonesia. We are honored to have you in Indonesia. Thank you. I am actually a bit excited today because I am a big fan of you. I teach your method on Quranic reading, hermeneutical Quranic reading. So I am very delighted to have you here. Okay, before I hand it over to Professor Wadud, I would like to read her CV. She has actually a very long 33 pages of CV, but also the short one. So I will make this, read the short CV of her. Dr. Amina Wadud is a world-renowned scholar and activist with a focus on Islam, justice, gender, and sexuality. She received a Ph.D. in August 1988 from Islamic Studies and Arabic, and also her MA on Near Eastern Studies at the University of Michigan, and got received the bachelor program from University of Pennsylvania. After achieving full professor, she retired from U.S. academia, except as visiting researcher at Starr King School for the Ministry, California, United States. And after 15 years in retirement, she has recently returned to academia as visiting professor to the State Islamic University in Yogyakarta, and she migrated to Indonesia in 2018 to avoid the chaos of U.S. Politics and ethics firsthand. Okay, she also received many grants and awards. Actually, she is among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world from the Royal Islamic Strategy Studies Center in 2009. And also many prizes like Democracy Prize from Association of Democratic Muslim Copenhagen, Denmark, and also many other awards that she received. And for her publications, we also know her public books, Quran and Women, also translated into Indonesia, a classic that helped toward the development of epistemology and methodology in Islamic feminism, which is the most dynamic aspect of Islamic reform today. It is 3 decades old and translated over 10 times, and most recently into French. And her second manuscript, Inside the Gender Jihad, Women's Reform in Islam, moved the discussion further by aligning it with a mandate for ethics and activism in collaboration with scholarship and spirituality. And actually, she's in her publication and presentation worldwide, she also have an expert in our discussion today about women and authority. She presented her paper in Muslim Women and Authority in Islam as a keynote speaker in Lewis and Clark College, very related to our discussion today, and also Muslim Women and Authority, Reconstructing Female Authority, Women's Participation in the Transmission and Production of Islamic Knowledge. That actually what we really need to recognize in today's discussions about female recognitions and in the production of Islamic knowledge. Hopefully we can share our knowledge on this with Professor Wadud. All right. Actually, she also have a mother. She is a mother of 5 and a nana of 6. Congratulations, and she is best known, as we know, as the Lady Imam. Okay, before without further ado, please welcome and joining me to welcome Professor Amina Wadud, who will deliver her speech on religious authority and women in contemporary era. And you will have a 30-minute presentation. The time is yours, Professor. You are still muted?
Okay. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and in all other matters. Actually, I have a PowerPoint or a Google Drive presentation. So may I share my screen?
Just wait a second. We will make you
Okay. Sorry, there's just a little bit. There it is. Thank you very much for this invitation. I should probably say that I'm so pleased to be here in Indonesia and to be part of the consortium of Islamic universities, Negara, and thank you from my part of the island of Java. Inshallah, one day I will return to visit Bandung. I've been there before. It will be my pleasure to return. This is a really huge topic for me, and it took me all of this week to work on this short 5 slides because the paper that I did was presented at the conference, and it turned out to be so long. It took me 50 minutes, and I still cut things back. And then I had to edit it for a chapter in an upcoming book, inshallah. And then I had to reduce that to talk about it today. So I will set my clock so that I don't go over my time. And hopefully during the question and answers, I can elaborate on details if I have not brought them up so far. I'm actually strategically interested in what I call the democratization of authority in Islam. And I want to help to build us towards that understanding. First of all, just to understand that, authority means many different things in Islamic history. Just like all of the key vocabularies that are politicized today, if you don't know how a person is using a term, you might think that you are talking the same way as they are talking, but actually they mean something else. So I'm concerned about how we construct a notion of authority in Islam and in Islamic thought, and therefore Muslim history and Muslim praxis, because that helps us to understand, our meaning. So the first question is, who can have it? And in particular, because our first understanding of authority was on the basis of the authority of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but his authority was conferred on him by Allah. Allah selected the Prophet to be the recipient of divine speech, the Quran. And as we know, the Quran is not just about Allah. In fact, you could say it's not about Allah at all. It's about people. And when you are trying to elevate the status of people to their highest moral excellence, this special gift from Allah becomes and has remained in Islam the unquestioned authoritative source. And that is because it's from Allah. Other people, when they claim authority, they have to claim authority in relationship to each other. Whereas Allah's authority is unquestioned, even if sublime and certainly transcendent, but importantly imminent. That is, Allah gives us, even within our own selves, min anfusikum ayat, gives us signs even within our own selves. Nevertheless, laysa kamithlihi shay, Allah is not like things. We are created things. And so there's a distinction. So when the Prophet, upon him be peace, is given authority from Allah directly, there's no one else who can claim that kind of authority. There are some disputes in history about whether or not it also can be retained in the family of the Prophet. But suffice it to say, as long as there is a dispute, it simply means that meanings are constructed. So the meaning of authority is constructed, and the reality of a constructed meaning and application is that it can also be contested. And the reason why this is important to me is because in the ways in which Islam and Muslims operate under a very authoritarian understanding, quite often there have been very powerful gender distinctions when we come to understand authority. And as a consequence, even when we establish very clear criteria of what would be considered authoritative, these are put into question when they adhere to a woman. So when the Prophet dies, upon him be peace, we come into, as you know, one of our first disputes over the meaning of authority, not only who has authority, but how much of the authority can they have? Is there anyone who can replicate the level of authority that the Prophet had, for example, and the Sunni and the Shia split so early in our history reminds us that there is some contestation of these different definitions. From my perspective here, I want to refer to the knowledge of Islam as a form of authority. And that knowledge, according to our primary sources, must be based on text, and those texts will be interpreted in order for a person to claim that they have authority with regard to those texts. All my life, I've been interested in interpretation. I'm interested in who can interpret a text, and not only that, how it is that their interpretations will be put into practice, that is become fundamental to the direction of and the development of the community of Muslims, and even to our notion of what we perceive of as Islam. In my estimation, interpretation is ongoing. It needs to be ongoing. And part of the reason why it needs to be ongoing is so that Islam can continue to be alive, dynamic, vibrant, the way that we actually live, the path that we actually follow, as opposed to some abstraction about the past or even about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm really interested in how does a person gain authority in the interpretations that they give to text. I'm not going to talk about political authority at all. Obviously, it's very clear that political authorities can turn into tyranny. So let's just focus a little bit about knowledge authority. Who is the one who knows? What is it that they know, and why is it important? Whenever we say knowledge, we need to understand that what we're talking about is truth. If you know something and it is false, that's not really knowledge. That's misinformation. That's delusion. I can say, for example, I am the most beautiful woman in the world. It's not true. And so in a way, when I say it, I cannot claim any authority in saying it. So the question of who knows and who has knowledge in the context of Islam is again referred back to the text and to the process of interpretation of those texts, because Islam is a way of life. It is a way that we're supposed to live. So it's not just bytes and bits of information in your head. It is the way in which you actually establish praxis. So whose interpretation can be used to implement the way of life in the context of Islam is an important consideration of who can claim authority. The idea of interpretation, I've already said, is something that I believe should stay alive, and therefore interpretations change. And because interpretations change, one of the features that we have to consider is what is the parameter of interpretation? Is it limited by gender? Is it limited by age? Is it limited by culture or historical context? There's some people who say, for example, well, you can't be an authority if you don't know Arabic. Well, you can be authority of certain things, and this is something I want you to consider as we go along. Certainly, in order to interpret the primary text of Islam, Arabic is a necessary tool, but there are other ways to gain knowledge. There's other ways to acquire truth, and more importantly, there are more kinds of truth that need to be put into implementation. So when we accept a person's interpretation, we give that person authority. And hopefully we do this without coercion, but voluntarily, because otherwise it's dogma. Belief must be allowed to flow freely, and the idea that we defer our understanding and belief of Islam to someone else can become very problematic. And one of the reasons why it becomes problematic is that we tend to rely on these persons beyond the extent to which they have actually confirmed their expertise or their competence. I used to say, if you go to the foot doctor, the podiatrist, and you have a question about your eyes, even though the foot doctor has expertise, they are not the ones that you confer with regard to your eyes. There are ophthalmologists and optometrists, so there are eye specialists. And Islamic thought is a bit like that, in that we have probably, in my estimation, one of the most rich intellectual traditions affiliated with religion, and it's still growing, it's still progressing, it's still changing. And so there is such a vast wealth of knowledge and knowledge production, but not everyone will, and I don't think necessarily has to, become an expert in everything or even a specific thing. For example, I made my choice to focus on the Quran because of my deep love of the Quran. And yet I'm often asked questions about fiqh. So I try to say, look, I'm a foot doctor. I can't tell you very much about your eyes. I can tell you the relationship of the Quran to the development of fiqh or jurisprudence, but that's not my area of expertise. And sometimes when you choose an area of expertise from this vast wealth of knowledge that is Islam, this beautiful wealth of knowledge that is Islamic thought, people say you're against something else. So people say, oh, you're anti-hadith. I'm not anti-hadith. I just didn't choose hadith as my area of specialization. I chose the area that I love the most, which is the Quran. So, I just want you to give an understanding that, first of all, there is a vast and diverse wealth of knowledge developed in Islamic history and continuing to be developed even in our current time. And that even though we have what we would call knowledge experts who are given authority, we should not ignore that we still have a responsibility to develop our own knowledge and also to question those things that do not allow us to develop our best personal practice and devotion to Allah. And I want to say a little bit about knowledge production in the context of Islam and Islamic thought, based on what I'm calling 4 levels of knowing. These have been developed in concert with interviewing knowers, that is, other human beings who know things. And there is a spectrum that develops over time and sometimes develops in specific areas. First is the received knower, or the received level of knowledge. And the received knower is very common because we live in a received knowledge tradition. The Prophet ﷺ received revelation from Allah. He was commanded with that receipt to also give that knowledge to others, risala, to announce it to others. There are others, according to the Quran, who also received wahi from Allah. For example, Mary, the mother of Isa, received wahi. The mother of Moses received wahi, but they were not commanded to give their knowledge to the community at large and for all history and posterity. So there is a distinction in terms of the, excuse me, of the gift from Allah. So you receive knowledge means that all of the expertise is outside yourself. The best that you can do is to choose between different experts. Now keep that in mind, because this is so central in Islam and Islamic thought that sometimes individual Muslims don't move beyond the received stage. They only wait for someone else to tell them what is truth, what is the best truth, what is the best practice, what is the best way to understand, and even what is the best way to practice what we have understood. But there is also the idea that the individual, that Islam is also focused on individual salvation, that each and every Muslim has a direct relationship with Allah, and each and every one of us has a capacity to worship directly to Allah. We don't have to go to the priest in the church and get permission in order to participate. We get to do it individually. And subjective knowledge is when sometimes there is an incongruence between what someone is telling you and what you are experiencing. So say, for example, I have a lovely plant in my garden and I water it the same way I water the other plants. And they say because it's not yet the rain season, which, as you know, now we're in heavy rain season, but it's not yet rain season, you should water every plant every day. But one of my plants is not responding to it very well. It seems to me subjectively that maybe I don't need to give so much water to that plant. So I'm going to go with my subjective perspective, and I'm going to water every other day or every 3 days just to see whether or not it makes a difference. In the context of, sacred knowledge, like from our sacred text and from the Sunnah and the Hadith of the Prophet, subjective knowledge is when we as individuals are working our way through the knowledge that is received, not because of just questions of belief in the authority of the Quran or of the Prophet, etc., but because the way in which the knowledge is transmitted to us doesn't resonate with our capacity to strengthen our belief. And subjective knowledge is an important part of developing your khilafah, your agency before Allah, where you take responsibility for the ways in which you respond to this vast wealth of knowledge. Procedural knowledge is when you develop a clear and coherent methodology in order to develop greater knowing. So if I start watering that plant every 3 days and it starts to thrive, then I will have a formula. I will say this plant benefits from water every 3 days. The other plants may benefit every day, but this plant develops only on the basis of a clear method of care, and that method for the moment is every 3 days. It's a procedure. And when you apply this to abstract knowledge, of course, the whole field of hermeneutics, the whole process of the interpretations of text and the ways in which these interpretations have many, many nuances becomes very clear, and you can challenge someone else's procedure, water plants every day. You can challenge their procedure based on the results of your own procedure. The last level that I want to talk about is the production of knowledge. When I came to learn about this, I was actually reading a book called Women's Ways of Knowing. The idea that knowledge is a thing that occurs as a result of not only what we receive, but how we experience it subjectively and what we then develop in order to help the knowledge to grow. This is important in the area of gender because the Muslim women's movement, something I've been involved in literally by next week, I will be in my 50th year, 50, as a Muslim by choice, all of it as an adult and all of it pursuing knowledge and then using that knowledge towards justice, equality, and dignity. So the women's movement in Islam is one of the places where the production of new knowledge has brought an important procedural challenge. And that challenge has been gender as a category of thought. The classical period included women and men, and yet the experience of knowledge development was overwhelmingly disproportionate, a privilege of men. When you still have to, make your way of living before the modern technologies and industries that we know about, the domestic sphere consumed a great deal of the energy of women. So the opportunity to sit in circles was less, not impossible, and certainly we have many examples, was less. And the consequence came when the foundational ways of thinking about Islam were predominantly led by men, and men disproportionately privileged themselves. They made themselves to have authority when authority really should be belonging to all of us. And so the matter of looking at the gender dynamics within even classical thought, in my case, I do it with regard to Quranic tafsir, has been one of the most important developments in the 21st century for the development of new knowledge in Islam. The main reference point that I did for my paper was a book by Khalid Abu Fadl called Speaking in the Name of Allah. I love the title because what it means is that when you speak about truth in Islam, you are claiming to have authority to represent Allah. And since Allah has been so generous and has given us so many gifts, so many ayah, not only the ayah of the Quran, but also ayah, in nature, in plants, and in ourselves, in our own bodies, we want to live our lives in a deen, the straight way, the path of Allah. So when we claim authority, we are claiming authority actually in Allah's name or on behalf of our belief in Allah. Khalid Abu Fadl says that knowledge authority in the Islamic system is egalitarian and diverse. I would contest that because even though, according to the rules abstractly, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, طلبة العلم فريضة على كل مسلم ومسلمة. Seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim male and Muslim female. There was a disparity of the voices of women that came to us from the classical period, and patriarchy became encoded in the way in which knowledge was developed, as well as in the authority to develop knowledge. So as I said earlier, even though within this Islamic system, certain very strict criteria were developed to determine who it is that can have authority, these come into question when they are fulfilled by a woman. So how is authority acquired? How does it operate? And what does it mean? I am interested in returning authority to everyone who believes in order to participate equally in the development of power and privilege, because the idea that you would have an authority, but that authority would not have your best interest, that is the interest in you developing your own capacity as al-insan al-kamil, the perfected human being, which is a product, again, of patriarchy, where men have privileged themselves to the extent where even when women have more knowledge than them, they assume that they are qawamun ala, that they are in charge of. One of the ways in which this is demonstrated is in a procedure of using lived reality as a method of knowledge production and therefore of interpretation and authority. And it's very simple. Everyone agrees on the quotation from Ibn Qayyum al-Jawziyah, who says that the maqasid, or the purpose of Sharia or Islamic law, in this case he means the divine law and not fiqh, the human understanding of that law, that every aspect of it is towards the goal or maqasid of justice. However, justice cannot be defined only from the outside. Justice must also be defined from inside. So if women experience injustice, it is not the job of an authority to come along and say, well, that's Islam, sister, there's nothing you can do about it. No, actually, their lived realities become a means for measuring the extent to which the justice that's being asserted as a principle or a virtue is actually reaching them. This is a method that was already used in classical Islamic fiqh. In particular, for example, if the fuqaha, the religious thinkers, wish to establish whether a particular medical procedure was permissible or not permissible in Islam, they would ask the medical experts. So we need the expertise of women. When the Quran discusses the experience of Maryam, who is giving birth to the Prophet Isa, alayhi salam, the tenderness the Quran exerts towards her experience is already a model for how we should continue. And yet, when only men have interpreted this passage, I think there may be some things that they are missing, because it takes a person who has experienced labor to give you the full extent of this reality. Therefore, we need in conversation the interpretations of women and men to help us to fulfill a broader breadth of the knowledge base and therefore of the capacity to live as Muslims. Oh, I have two more, so I better hold on. Sorry, go back. In my experiences, for example, as the Lady Imam, I have been told that by doing it, I lose authority, which I think is very interesting, because they mean the sort of male power-based authority, which I have no desire for. But Khalid Abul Fazl says there's another way to claim authority, and that is by asserting something, an opinion or a perspective, and by its assertion, it becomes a marker for the community conversation, even transformation. So the idea of a lady imam now 10, 15, even 25 years after the first experience that I had giving a khutbah in 1994 in South Africa, You can't have a conversation about women's leadership and authority without talking about women's imama. So it has become a marker for the community. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It simply means that it is part of the discourse. The other aspect of the Muslim women's movement that I want to end with is the idea that the definition of Islam and what it means to have faith is not something that can be decided outside of a person. And so women have begun to align their efforts for justice, equality, and democracy with their religious and cultural identities. This means that they are the experts that align the reality, the lived reality of Muslim women with the understanding of what it means to know in Islam. And as such, they become the authorities. We are the people, therefore we are Islam. There can be no Islam without the people, and all people contribute to its growth and development. Thus, we are all authorities, and the only way to examine or critique our authority is on the merit of the knowing experience on the ways in which Islam remains true. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for such an interesting and inspiring presentations. And here I would like to mention first some notes from your presentation in Bahasa in order that several audience could understand what has been delivered by Prof. Wadud. Di sini Prof. Wadud menjelaskan diawali dari penjelasan tentang definisi otoritas ya, dan itu akan sangat beragam, tetapi di sini menjelaskan bahwa menerima tentang otoritas itu kita awali dari Nabi Muhammad, yang Nabi Muhammad itu mendapatkan otoritas itu langsung ya dari Allah ya, tetapi kemudian dari Muhammad kepada sahabatnya, kemudian berlanjut terus sampai kita jadi ini proses kita menerima knowledge itu ya di dalam Islam adalah dalam tradisinya seperti itu. Tetapi kemudian beliau menjelaskan juga terkait dengan otoritas, berkaitan dengan otoritas itu di dalam Islam itu selalu dikonstruksi dan selalu dikontestasi gitu. Kemudian di sini kita bicara tentang bagaimana proses menginterpretasikan terkait dengan knowledge tadi di dalam atau pengetahuan di dalam Islam ya, dan bagaimana concernnya Prof. Wadud itu adalah dalam interpretasi yang dia pilih ya, interpretasi terhadap Al-Quran dan bagaimana cara mengaplikasikan dari proseduralnya gitu ya. Dan kemudian ada beberapa aspek yang perlu diperhatikan ketika bicara tentang interpretasi di dalam tradisi Islam. Pertama tentang pemilihan siapa yang kemudian interpretasinya siapa yang kemudian bisa kita pergunakan gitu dan kemudian bisa kita pakai gitu, karena tadi menginterpretasikan teks itu akan sangat terkait dan dipengaruhi oleh tadi gender, usia, budaya. Oleh sebab itu dia akan terus berkembang dan berubah. Tetapi apabila seseorang kemudian interpretasi seseorang atas teks itu kemudian diterima, maka dia sudah disebut bisa mendapatkan otoritas itu, gitu ya. Jadi tetapi tidak boleh ketika seseorang menerima otoritas tadi, interpretasinya untuk diterima itu tidak boleh berdasarkan pemaksaan, harus voluntarily, gitu ya. Nah kemudian untuk membangun ya, jadi tidak ada yang salah di dalam proses pemberian knowledge itu, pengetahuan. Kalau misalnya ada gap itu adalah bagaimana cara orang menerima knowledge tadi, yang itu kemudian disebut dengan subjektif di dalam individu-individu, yang kemudian bagaimana untuk bisa kita menerima knowledge itu adalah dengan cara kita develop atau meningkatkan kapasitas dari pemahaman kita, sehingga kita terhadap knowledge yang kita terima itu kita bisa challenging atau misalnya mengganti prosedural yang tadi knowledge yang sudah kita terima itu yang terkait dengan subjective knowledge. Kemudian Oleh sebab itu pengetahuan dari kita untuk mendapatkan expertise itu harus terus diasah gitu ya, diasah sehingga kita bisa juga opportunity menjadi expert tadi dan kemudian bisa menularkan dan mendapatkan otoritas itu. Yang perlu dihindari adalah claiming to have authority itu tadi dari Allah ya, misalnya dia menjelaskan tentang bukunya Khalid Abdul Fadl tentang Speaking in God's Names itu, yang kemudian menganggap bahwa seorang bisa mengatasnamakan diri sebagai bagian dari otoritas dari Allah itu sendiri gitu ya. Kemudian otoritas itu terkait dengan perempuan, memang dalam tradisinya sebetulnya suara-suara perempuan itu sudah ada di dalam Islam, hanya saja budaya patriarki yang kemudian mendefinisikan, karena banyak laki-laki ya di situ mempunyai privilege sehingga didefinisikan oleh laki-laki. Dan di situ kemudian posisi peran perempuan menjadi tidak terlihat. Oleh sebab itu ketika bicara tentang justice ya, beliau juga mengutip tentang maqasid syariah yang endingnya itu harus maslahah ya atau justice, tetapi justice itu sendiri harus didefinisikan bukan hanya oleh orang luar tetapi oleh dari dalam inside yang menerimanya. Oleh sebab itu harus berdasarkan tadi life reality itu sebagai cara ya, method of knowledge productionnya itu. Untuk para perempuan sekarang sudah mulai ya meningkatkan expertise-nya supaya mereka punya otoritas ya di dalam produksi knowledge di dalam Islam, supaya equal opportunity ya dalam menyebarkan tentang justice dari teks itu, sehingga otoritas itu, karena kalau menurut Prof. Wadud otoritas itu milik semua orang gitu. Tetapi tadi ada cara-cara untuk memperolehnya. Baik, itu untuk sedikit resume dari pemaparan dari Prof. Wadud terkait dengan otoritas di dalam Islam dan kemudian kaitannya dengan perempuan.